Good morning, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and welcome to your weekly forecast for the week of July 22nd through the 28th. Welcome to Leo season, everyone. We are going to be moving into a few planetary ingresses into the sign of Leo, including the Sun and Venus this week. So that's something to look out for. We're going to talk about the first decan of Leo today. We're going to talk about the meaning of the sun and how that is working with Leo and being in its own domicile. We're going to do a little bit of a thing called the Essential Dignities report today, where we're kind of examining where some of the major players are within either domicile, exaltation, or triplicity, which is something that will give the planets a little bit of a boost or a little bit of I don't know, the wind in the sails if we're talking about triplicity. So that's something we'll take a look at. And then we'll go through just the aspects of the week. We've got a couple interesting ones, including Mercury conjoining Venus and Mars making a trine with a retrograde Jupiter. So those are the big non-moon planet aspects this week, but we'll go over the moon placements as well, and kind of the moon phases of the week as well. So let's jump right into it. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about first before we get right into it is just a little bit of what Leo and what the sun are all about, and talk about the tarot card that's associated with the first decan of Leo. So I'm going to show you this card here. I like to do a card every week or so to, kind of give a visual aid for some of the planetary placements of the important planetary placements. And what we have here is the Five of Wands, which you see a group of youths, I guess, kind of vying for position. They doesn't look like they're necessarily cooperating with one another. They seem to all have a bit of their own agenda. And this card was called Strife, according to the Book of Thoth and Book T. Austin Coppock, in his wonderful book 36 Faces, calls this the spotlight. So we have this kind of this energy of trying to vie for position and of the spotlight when things are moving into Leo 1. Now, what is interesting about that is of course, the sun is the host or the steward. Traditionally, we call it the ruler of a sign, where the sun is providing resources and significations to be acted upon with whatever finds itself in that birth channel. Remember, we talked about the planets as being abstractions. This is something I've been kind of absorbing from the Hellenistic system and Project Hindsight and things like Robert Schmidt and Demetra George and Chris Brennan, where the sign itself is a birth channel for whatever abstractions the planet would represent. So one of the things that we're experiencing here, also I want to back up and say, whatever planet is the host of that sign is going to be offering up significations to be acted upon by whatever planet is moving within that sign. So you think of the sign itself as this birth channel, and the planetary abstractions are what is being born within that channel. And as they're being born within that birth channel, they're taking on like a guise of significations or of meaning. So whenever something moves through the birth channel of Leo, it's taking on solar significations, and solar significations are being acted upon by whatever planet is in there. Now, what's really interesting is the sun itself is in its own domicile of Leo. So the solar energy is going to be, it's like a double down on the sun. So what does the sun represent? Well, the sun has significations of authority, and authority figures in general as diurnal. It is said to be masculine or very active, okay? And it is something where we're going to see a commanding presence come to the fore. Robert Schmidt likes to say that Mars is action, but the actual taking of the action, whereas the sun is the commanding of others to take the action. So we may see an increase in our ability to issue commands, our ability to take authority and to take on the mantle of leadership when the sun moves into Leo. That's something that could be much more, that could be supported in a much easier way now that the sun has, basically the sun has come home, the king. Okay, the sun was thought of as the king, has come back to his castle, and he has all of his servants around him, and he has all of his resources. He's got his coffers are full, and he's ready to just shine his benevolent rule. And the sun takes on a place of, I would say, integrity when it's in Leo. It's much easier to do solar actions. It also represents the light of the mind, the intellect. So it's easier for us to get in touch with perhaps the divine parts of ourselves. With, the sun was said to represent divinity and unity. Also the concept of selection and being special. So this is a time in your life to figure out what makes you special and what makes you want to shine your solar light. What kind of places in your life you might want to take authority and be somebody who is, where do you find the point in your chart that's special? Look to the Leo ruled house in your chart. If your Leo section, if your Leo house is in, I don't know, the 9th house, maybe it's something with your belief structure. Maybe you're very good in the realm of higher education and higher learning, some of the things that are associated with the 9th house. Maybe you shine your light with finding meaning, because the 9th house is associated with finding your purpose and why you are doing the actions that you're doing that are associated with the 10th house. Maybe you have Leo in the 10th house, and you're very good at taking action out in the world, and that's something where you find a sense of specialness. And this could go on and on and on. We could, if you looked at the 11th house, maybe you take a leadership role within a group dynamic or within a group of people who are trying to enact an altruistic mission or a goal. So think about that. Meditate on where in your chart you may be able to take a leadership role, because that area of your chart is really supported now that the sun is moving into Leo. This is also a lightening up of the energy that we've been experiencing with all these Cancerian placements. We're going to start getting, planets are starting to move out of the opposition with Saturn and Pluto and the South Node, which has been a pretty heavy experience lately. We've done a lot of heavy lifting here, I think. We're still in the middle of a Mercury retrograde, and Mercury has just moved, as I'm recording this on Friday, coming to you from the past if you're seeing this on Sunday or into the future. Mercury's just moved back into the sign of Cancer, and we've got a real watery Mercury right now again, and it's going back through all of the challenging oppositions by whole sign aspect. We'll talk about that a little bit, but for the most part, I think that the worst is behind us. That's the vibe I'm getting. I know that there's still challenges ahead. We're still moving towards the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the beginning of the year. But some of the really difficult astrology that we've been going through over the first couple months of the summer, I think may start to lighten just a bit as we move into Leo season here. Okay, so let's jump into it. So before I get into that, let's share my screen here. Let me give you a little bit of the essential dignity report here. And I think this is kind of a neat little thing, because when we talk about essential dignities, this is kind of special powers that the planets have when they are in certain signs. Accidental dignity is something that is represented by the aspects that they're making planets and by house placement. But essential dignity is sign-based. So what we're seeing, what we're going to be seeing is the sun moving into its own domicile here, which gives it rulership or dignity by domicile. And then we are going to see it having a triplicity ruler during the day, because the sun is the triplicity ruler of the fire signs during the day. So it is the diurnal triplicity ruler. Now let's talk about that a little bit. Been learning a lot from my own astrology teacher, Mr. Adam Ellenbaus of Nightlight Astrology, and he's coming up and helping to illuminate a number of very interesting theories about triplicity and the dignities in general. And he's begun experimenting, and thus I've begun experimenting with the planets or the dignities having a planetary nature. And one of the things that he was explaining a few weeks ago was domicile rulerships having the nature of the sun, exaltation rulerships having the nature of the moon and being related to fortune. And this past week, we talked about triplicity a little bit, and it was very interesting because he was relating that to the nature of Jupiter. Now, I don't know if this is fully fleshed out yet, and I think Adam will tell you the same, so I wouldn't hold any of us to this as a really like solid interpretation yet, but there's a lot of things that make sense about it. And one of the things that we see with triplicity rulers, in Demetra George's book, Astrology and Ancient Astrology and Theory and Practice, she describes triplicity as having communal support. Robert Schmidt talks about it, and some of the ancient authors speak about this as having the winds at your back. So remember, we have these boating metaphors, these ship sailing metaphors that we're experiencing with ancient Hellenistic astrology, amongst other things like comparing the planets as being in a cosmic courtroom or being members of a community or a city. And when we have triplicity rulership, what it sounds like is we have this nice wind at our back that is supporting us, where we are. Jupiter is, of course, the greater benefic, so we get kind of some goodies. You know, we get nice beneficial support when we have Jupiterian things being activated in our chart. And with this triplicity thing, it might be like, you know, this is kind of a, you know, the community is cheering for us. We've got some momentum that is happening from having a planet within its own triplicity. So the very beginning of, well, the sun has like double awesomeness during the day when it's in Leo, because it has both domicile rulership, which means that it has resources available to it, like it's in its own castle, so to speak, and it has rulership or dignity by triplicity during the day. Now remember, with triplicity rulers, we have different ones for the daytime and the nighttime. And then we had this other one called the cooperating ruler. Now for the fire signs, the sun is the daytime ruler and Jupiter is the nighttime ruler. So the sun is going to have like a double dose of dignity. It has access to its own resources, and it has the support of its community. So, you know, a lot of times when you see the sun in the first, you know, the sun in a daytime chart in the sign of Leo, that's going to be a very powerful sun within your chart and within the transits and things of that nature. A couple other triplicity rulerships that we have happening right now. I'm going to clear this. Let's just give the whole report here. Venus still has triplicity during the day. It's in its own triplicity, okay? Which means that Venus is the diurnal triplicity ruler of the water signs. So we have Venus in Cancer in a water sign, and she has dignity during the day, okay? Now that's important. Now we're kicking around this theory. I've been talking to a number of other astrologers about this, about, well, if the triplicity rulers change in a birth chart for the day and the nighttime, why wouldn't they be changing rulerships by transit? It seems to make sense. So that's something we've been experimenting with. So my thoughts on this is that when we're trying to work with these planetary energies, we may have more support when we are using them during the day or during the evening, or when we're trying to work with them. I wouldn't say just using them, because basically they're using us. So I think when you're trying to achieve Venusian matters, they may be more effective and have more wind in the sails, so to speak, during the daytime while Venus is in Cancer. Now that's going to shift when Venus moves into Leo later in this week. It's going to lose some dignity, but it's going to be sitting at the table with its host, the Sun. So that's a mitigating factor. So that's Venus. Jupiter here is in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a fire sign, which its diurnal ruler is the Sun. So because its triplicity ruler is going to be in better shape, that does improve Jupiter's condition during the day. But Jupiter is its own triplicity ruler at night. So this is kind of interesting. So Jupiterian matters might be a little bit more effective or efficient during the evening, even though Jupiter is of the diurnal sect and generally is happier during the day in daytime charts. But it's got more wind in the sails, so to speak, in the evening right now. So that's something to keep an eye on for Jupiter. Jupiter is also in its own domicile, so it has access to its own resources, just like the Sun does. So the Sun and Jupiter are going to be very powerful for the next, month or so, as the Sun moves through the sign of Leo, and they're complementary. They're partners. They are of the same diurnal sect. They are sect mates. So there may be some really nice harmony between them by whole sign trine aspect. There's going to be an ability to work with kind of your solar light and your Jupiterian sense of justice and benevolence. So those things might be working well together. And the Sun may be more effective during the day, so you could work with your solar commanding authoritative qualities during the day. And you could be a little bit more about figuring out purpose and harmonizing and bridge building and things of those natures during the evening with Jupiter. Okay, the only other thing that we have that I can see, if I haven't missed anything with essential dignities, is we still have Saturn in its own domicile of Capricorn. So Saturn is still very strong in the domicile of Capricorn. He has all his own resources. He is able to enact his significations of creating boundaries, creating walls, decay, of being the distributor of time, of entropy, of dissolving structures, and then thus laying the foundation for building them up again. It is the outer boundary. So with the 7 visible planets, Saturn was the edge of the solar system. And so that is creating that boundary structure that keeps us aware of our limitations. So that's something that Saturn is really doing right now very well, is making us aware of our limitations, generally helping us live within them, hopefully, and getting us to have a sense of maturity when it comes to the things that we need to do but may not want to. And this is something that really is a Saturn signification. It's kind of doing the things that we know we have to do, but we may not enjoy it. That's a very Saturnian type of thing. So keep an eye on that as well. Okay, let's start moving through the week here. So that's our essential dignities report for the week. We are looking at Monday, the 22nd. And at the beginning of the day, we are seeing the moon is going to be in the sign of Pisces very early in the morning. And it's going to be making a trine to the sign of Cancer and to the Sun. So very early in the morning in Eastern time, we have this nice trine. It's not the greatest, which is the nature of Jupiter again. And we'll keep using the language. We'll keep trying to gain fluency. I'm going to repeat these kind of concepts each week. So as you continue to listen, maybe you will get more fluency with some of these traditional and Hellenistic techniques. So a nice trine between the moon and the sun, bringing probably some decent dreams to your dream life there. As we move forward in the day, we're going to see the moon start to move into the sign of Aries. And this is pretty interesting. We are in the beginning of the week, we are in a disseminating moon phase, which is 135 degrees to 90 degrees behind the sun. So you see how the moon here, if you can see my chart, has an axis or a diameter here, or a radius, and wasn't always the greatest of man. An arc of distance, there you go, which is going to be smaller, okay, where the moon is behind in the zodiac rather than in front of the sun. This area right here would be in front. This area right here would be behind. So now we are 135 degrees to 90 degrees behind the sun. And this is after the full moon. We had the eclipse thing happening last week. We had all these oppositions happening. A lot of things maybe were revealed or came to light. And now we're kind of dealing with the aftermath. We're seeing what the fruit of that first cycle was that we experienced on the eclipse, the new moon solar eclipse on July 2nd. And now we're kind of getting whatever, either reward or punishment or whatever. And we're disseminating what we've learned from the opposition out into the world. We may be starting to share our ideas. We may be starting to harvest the fruit that was planted in that beginning of that cycle. So that's something that's going to be moving mostly through our week as that disseminating moon phase. We do touch upon the balsamic phase at the very end of the week on Sunday, but we can talk about that when we get to Sunday. So this is a good time for communication. This is a good time for sharing your ideas. This is a good time for kind of, distributing your knowledge, for sharing everything that you've learned throughout this cycle, and starting to move forward with some of the plans that you have put into motion at the beginning of the cycle. So really the only moon aspect that I'm seeing is the trine to the sun very early in the morning. And then the next thing that we have in the day is going to be the sun moving into Leo, okay, at around 10:51 in the PM Eastern time. So you can see the sun is moving into Leo. It's going to be co-present with Mars. All right. So now it's kind of like Mars is sitting at the table with its host, the sun. So that strengthens Mars too, because Mars has a lot of access to the solar resources now. So this may really amplify our ability to take action while also giving commands. So it's kind of like walking your talk. If you're going to ask someone to do something, you have to be able to demonstrate that to them and show that you are willing to go down that path as well. So this may be a time to really start to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, and you'll have resources to do that. This will probably heat some stuff up though too. Mars is going to be, at this point, Mars is under the beams of the sun. You can see that in the days leading up to that, Mars was 15 degrees away or so from the sun, okay? And this was happening very early on, when the sun was at 28 degrees Cancer or so, we started to see it moving very close to being under the beams. So this is called a heliacal setting. And this is when Mars is kind of going beneath the beams. It's hidden. A lot of our actions may start to take place a little bit more in secret because they're being kind of blinded out by the very bright rays of the sun, by the solar rays. Of course, Mars right now is an evening star. So which means that he is rising. If let's take a look over here. If the sun was over here at the eastern horizon, and we were, it was the beginning of the day, and Mars was down here, as you can see, this relationship over here, okay? When the sun rises, it's going to rise first, and then Mars is going to rise after by primary motion. When we go clockwise around the chart, that's representing the diurnal or primary motion that happens by the spinning of the globe. And we can see if we go just in hours, the planets are going to move in this clockwise motion throughout the zodiac. So, if we can actually observe this as well out in the world, if we go and watch the sky, we can see the sun come up and move across from the east, rise into the southern sky and then set in the west. And if we are able to see some of these planets at night as well, we can see them making the same type of trek across the sky. So what this means is that Mars is more hidden now within the solar significations. It's kind of, working together with the sun, but some of the actions you take may be a little bit more behind the scenes, which is okay. That's part of the cycle that it goes through pretty regularly here. Now, there's some debate on whether Mars is happier as an evening star or a morning star. There's different authors that say a few different things. I'm guessing the consensus is that it's a little bit happier as an evening star because some of its heat is mitigated by being of the night. Okay, like night is associated with coolness and dampness, and that sort of lowers the threshold of Mars heat and something of that nature. But Mars is a masculine planet, quote unquote, according to some traditional doctrine. So there's a little bit of debate, I guess we'll say, where there isn't as much debate with with Venus and Jupiter and things like that. Venus, of course, prefers being a nocturnal evening star, and Jupiter, of course, prefers being of the day or diurnal. So as we move through Monday here, let's keep it rolling. So the other thing that I wanted to give you an awareness of is that as we speak about this, we went through a Cazimi moment with the sun on Sunday, or we are going through it today if you're watching this on Sunday, where Mercury made its inferior conjunction with the sun, which is the beginning of an entire new Mercury cycle. So there's probably something really interesting happening today on Sunday, if you're watching this on Sunday, or go back to Sunday and look at what's going on and really take note of the actions that are happening. What is being born today in the Cancerian ruled part of your chart? What is the little seed that you're feeling? What is the new impulse that you're seeing? Because that's gonna be something that you're gonna be dealing with this whole Mercury cycle, which lasts for many months. So what we're seeing now is as Mercury is starting to separate again from the sun, it now is rising before it. So you can see Mercury is becoming of the morning. Okay, see how it's above the sun now in that relationship? So Mercury is going to be rising until it makes its morning rise, or heliacal morning rise, which means it escapes from the beams at 15 degrees. And this happens on the 31st. We're not talking about that this week, but that may be some of the things that you may have started this weekend on Sunday. You might really see some sort of omen of that new start when Mercury makes its morning appearance. That was said to be a condition of phasis, where it was an omen that speaks. That was something that was from Schmidt and from Demetra George, where we're really seeing this kind of appearance of something. And you can look at this in your chart if you do secondary progressions and things like that. When Mercury is making one of those conditions, when it escapes the beams, there's usually really important things that are happening. So keep your eyes peeled for the looking ahead, or when Mercury actually goes direct, which is on the 31st, and makes its morning rise the next day on August 1st. So that's really when things are going to start to move forward with Mercury stuff. But we're going to really pay attention to what wants to be born on Sunday. And then, this Mercury right now is like someone who was going through the furnace. It took to its sickbed as it came into the inferior conjunction, and then it's starting to rise and gain strength again. It's still not strong. Mercury is still not strong. I compared it last week to a butterfly that's hatching from the cocoon, but the wings are still wet. So for the next week or two here, we are still going to be experiencing kind of this very baby Mercury. You know, Mercury has hatched out from the cocoon. The wings are still wet. It's a little tiny baby. Although the baby Mercury was pretty mischievous, if you know your astrology or your mythology. Baby Mercury did some stuff. I believe he made the lyre, or like a guitar of sorts, from a tortoise shell, and got up to all sorts of other mischief as a youth, as a little young spry god or demigod here. So just be on the lookout for that. Just because Mercury is young and not at its full strength yet does not mean that he may not pull a few tricks or two as we go through this week. Okay. So as we move forward, just a few couple other notes about the sun moving into Leo. As we move forward here, we're going to see this sun. I had a couple other notes that I thought were interesting. Okay, the sun's going to move into Leo right there in the evening of Monday, the 22nd. And of course, the sun had a few other cool names too. The sun was called Sol, Helios, Shamash, Surya, in all these different traditions, astrological and cultural traditions. And the neat thing that I saw as I was doing my research for this week ahead forecast, Dimitri George says that all of these were portrayed with beams of light emanating from their head. So this is like a focal point. You know, the sun is focusing. It is, you know, if we go back to that image of the spotlight, we're all vying, okay, to be in that solar light. And we are emanating that very focused solar beam. And the sun was also associated with divination and with taking oaths. But it was also the process of selection. So really seeing that this is a time when you are really learning to focus on what your particular gifts are. What is it that where you create a sense of identity that may be unique to you? And that's going to be something that is a real focal point, I think, for the beginning of this week and throughout Leo season, we can say. All right, moving into Tuesday. As we move into Tuesday, the moon is still in Aries, and we are continuing on in our disseminating phase. You can see, as I click through the chart here, if you're watching on the video, you can see that the sun is moving this way in clockwise motion. It's still underneath the horizon. The ascendant is going to mark the horizon, and the sun is going to be rising above, you know, around 6:30 or so. You can see the sun is risen. Now, look again, we have Mercury and Venus rising before the sun. Now, Venus is far enough away from the sun that it will still be visible in the sky, whereas Mercury, actually, no, I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm doing the wrong thing here. All of these planets, pardon my miscue. Thanks, Mercury. See all these planets? All of these, we've got the two inferior planets, Venus and Mercury, and they are within about 6 or 7 degrees, you know, respectively, of the sun. So that's still under the beams. And then Mars, the superior planet, is pretty close to the sun right now, within 13 degrees. So it is also invisible. So this is a whole matrix of planets that are kind of under the beams of the sun, under the rule of that solar authority, and enacting a lot of their significations in secret. All right. So you may be really brewing a lot of these types of things behind the scenes a little bit. Okay. But you can see now, one of the things I want to talk about here is, here we see both Venus and Mercury rising before the sun, and then Mars rising after. Okay. So that's just a little demonstration of that concept that we've been going through. Okay. There we go. And I'm going to get rid of that here. So in the beginning of the day, around 9:30 or so, the first aspect we're going to see with the moon is a trine with Mars. Okay, so that we're going to look at our lunar aspects here. And we've got at 13 degrees, we've got a lunar trine with Mars. The sun's just moved into Leo, and we've got a lot of fire energy. And actually, this beautiful little grand fire trine that I'm just noticing here, okay, with Jupiter, Mars, and the moon. So this is a really active arrangement. We've got a little bit of reception with the moon and Mars. Okay, so the moon is in Mars's sign, so there's a positive conversation, the trine, which is of the nature of Jupiter, between the moon and Mars, activating our ability to take action. And we've got Jupiter here kind of informing all of this with his own trine, lending his support to these actions that we're trying to take here. So the beginning of Tuesday to me begins with enthusiasm. And this is enthusiasm where we are going to be potentially taking some very important actions that are very fiery in nature, very, very active, very visible, very, externalized. So this is maybe a great day for doing some exercise, an exercise routine, things like that, for working on projects that are very near and dear to your heart, that are an expression of your particular identity. I remember in Demetra's original book on learning astrology, she associated the fire signs with identity. And, there was the personal, the transpersonal, and the interpersonal versions of that with Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, respectively. But this may be something about how are you expressing yourself? And you've got support from Jupiter, Mars, and the moon. Okay, so we can see that that moon is going to make it's going to perfect. Okay, it's going to perfect with Jupiter around noon. Okay, at 15 degrees. There we go, around 12:15 or so Eastern time. That's when the trine happens. So that, like I said, that morning is really active. Now, one of the things that happens immediately after that, excuse me, is that the moon, as it starts to separate from Jupiter on Tuesday, it's going to start moving into a square with Saturn. So, can you see this here? Now it's moving into a square, which is of the nature of Mars. So there's some friction that develops. So to me, this is like, well, we've gotten all this enthusiasm. We're getting really fired up. We want to take an action. We may have initiated something, and then we are coming face to face with potentially some sort of limitation. And this may cause some internal friction or external friction. It could cause you to feel like, with this moon in Aries, I want what I want when I want it. This is who I am, damn it. I'm going to express this. And you may get a little bit of a reality check or a slap back in the afternoon on Tuesday with the moon running into Saturn, or just an obstacle to be overcome. Speaking of overcoming, this is a really interesting configuration that we can talk about here, or another concept to talk about. Now, overcoming, I've been actually just reading this chapter in Demetra's book. I'm almost done with her book. I've been slowly working my way through ancient astrology in theory and practice over the last few months, taking very diligent notes. And this is a concept called overcoming. Okay. Overcoming. And this is also, when it's by the square aspect here, this means that the planet in the superior position in the zodiac, okay, is squaring or making contact with a planet that is at a different point in the zodiac here. You can see that Saturn is earlier in the zodiac than the moon is in Aries. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive because we tend to think of Aries as being the beginning of the zodiac, but really it's a circle. So wherever you're seeing the arc of the least amount of distance, Okay, this is going to be earlier in the zodiac, basically because it rises, it's going to rise over the horizon before the moon. So if I click this all the way over, we would see Saturn actually rising or culminating before the moon on this by primary motion. So what does that mean? That means that Saturn is going to be maltreating the moon by overcoming. This was a really powerful position when the overcoming planet was 10 signs away from the planet that it was aspecting. So here, for example, if we move this chart over, okay, I'm just going to move this over a little bit, and we see right here, now Saturn's in the 10th house and the moon is in the first house. So here's our relationship that we have. Okay, Saturn is going to be exerting this dominance over, okay, the moon. And that is a pretty, that's a challenging thing, especially when it is a malefic, all right? So there may be some kind of force that is exerting some sort of dominance upon your plan because of that needs to be worked through, a conversation that needs to be had, and a kind of an ability to work through those challenges. So don't expect every action that you take at the beginning of this fire trine energy to not have some kind of resistance in the afternoon. And if you know that going in, you can kind of temper your enthusiasm just a little bit, because I got news for you. You're going to be fired up at the beginning of the week. With all of the new fire sign energy, with the sun in Leo, with the Mars in Leo, with the moon in Aries, Jupiter in Sagittarius, you're going to be ready to rock. But there may be some things some kind of limiting factor that you're going to have to work within. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Saturn limitations are the types of things that keep you from overdoing it, and from, keeps the toddler from running out into the street or things like that. It's the constructive no. So there may be a constructive no that you have to really come to terms with as we move through Tuesday afternoon. All right, so let's move forward. As we move into Wednesday, okay, the next aspect that we're going to be starting to experience is a square with Pluto. So that happens very early in the morning on Wednesday, but we're going to be feeling it throughout the evening because, the moon has a very wide orb, I guess, of influence. Some authors say that when the moon is within 12 degrees of something, we really feel it. So that may be something that we're going to be experiencing as we move through the evening on Tuesday. You come up against the limitation, you try to work through it, and then you really dig deep with Pluto and really try to get to the core issue of what the real problem is. Pluto energy is very good for diving into the depths of things, into the underworld, so to speak, and really unearthing what is deeply buried beneath the surface. So perhaps you have to come face to face with some kind of power dynamic that is buried under the surface, and figure out potentially where some of the corruption lies before you can move forward with your plan. I see a lot. We've just gone through the Venus-Pluto stuff. I had a Venus-Pluto square that was transiting in my chart just the other day, and the energy was very, very challenging within relationships. And it just the experience that I got with Pluto, and I think this is very instructive of how I understand Pluto, is I had a feeling of just going cold. Just really just like freezing up, going very deep into a place that was very hard to get out of. Like after it wasn't a huge argument or anything. It was just an energy. It was just a small little type of thing where I could feel my negative, my worst self trying to bubble up from the surface. There was a little bit of a discontent about decision making. One person, wanted to make a decision, or one person wanted the other person to make the decision. And then there was this coldness that just came through that was like very, I know we talk about Pluto as a volcano, but I'm almost feeling it like it's this kind of really frigid type of energy too. I mean, potentially what is buried deep in the ground is in this very cold cave-like place too. Yes, we have the liquid hot magma at the very core, but we may be going through lots of, I don't know, very inhospitable type of environments before we get to that molten core. And I felt myself completely shutting down. So that may be something that you have to deal with too. You may be experiencing some negative feelings that are bubbling up that need to be dealt with. And you may feel a very cold presence type of coming in that's putting a lot of like cold, I don't know, splashing cold water or solidifying in this very like slowing type of energy, because Pluto is in an earth sign, to all of the active, fast-moving, fiery heat. So keep your eyes peeled for that at the end of Tuesday. It's just a slowing down. Be careful not to get lost within the depths of your issue. If you bring them to the light and you keep dealing with it, Pluto really is the reformer. Okay, so we like to say, use the word transformation a lot with the chart, but I think that, from what I've read and from my experiences, Pluto really has a real, I don't know, not a monopoly, but he really exemplifies that transformational energy where we have to deal with the decay and with the things that aren't working so that we can kind of be reborn in that phoenix type of energy. So that is very early on on Tuesday. So you can see that perfecting very early in the morning on Wednesday, the 24th. We're also going to be experiencing a lot of aspects with retrograde planets too. Pluto is retrograde, Mercury is retrograde, and we're going to see aspects connecting both of those in the beginning of the day. The first aspect we see is a square from the moon to Venus. So as we move forward through our morning, we've got the moon in Aries making a square to Venus in Cancer. So this may bring up some frictions within the family. Venus acting upon, lunar significations of family, of the public, of the masses. So we can think of our country and things like that as a family as well. So there may be some things that get triggered around that as well. We've really been going through the mill right now with all of the stuff that's been going on. It's just even hard to keep up with all of it. For those of you who are fighting the good fight and the good, trying to bring justice to the situations of injustice, keep going. I think you're doing a great job. And try to figure out, if you aren't getting involved, you should maybe figure out what your role is and what you can do. I do think it is one of the things that starts internally. I think that it's very important to kind of get your mind right and get your immediate environment right so that you can be a force for good out in your greater community. I think that's where it starts. If you don't feel like you're able to just, be somebody who is out on the front lines of these things, I think you can still make a difference by really working on these types of issues that are coming up in the microcosm within your personal life, within your internal aspects as well. If you have a crystallized belief system that may not be working anymore, that's the work that you have to do. If you are stronger and if you are in a position where your voice is more out there and more visible, use it to continue to speak up for the people who need you. And there's people that need us right now, that need fairness, justice. There's lots of innocence that's being, I don't know. There's lots of things that are being like really challenged right now with what's going on in our country. And we're at like I said last week, we're at a moment of reckoning. And what side of history do you want to be on? And I just really encourage you, again, I'm going to keep saying this, to choose the path of love and compassion. I just think things work out better that way. I know that some people may have gotten really fixed in their positions on both sides of things. But I think try to find the bridge between you, and try to find where you can be some sort of light within that darkness. I know that we really went through a heavy month, and I think it's important to kind of acknowledge the work that's been done, and also acknowledge there's a lot more work to be done. So I hope that all of you are kind of feeling a surge of vitality again to keep going. Okay, so as we move forward through Wednesday, we're going to see the moon coming in contact with retrograde Mercury at 26 degrees of Aries and Cancer, a square. And squares, of course, are the nature of Mars. And the last time that Mercury was at 26 degrees was on June 22nd. So what I want you to do is maybe go back, if you keep a journal or anything like that, I want you to go back to that time frame and see what was happening on that particular day. Because in addition to the moon squaring at that position, we're going to see Mercury retrograding back into a conjunction with Venus. Now this is really interesting. This kind of thing happens when we have, it doesn't happen very often. I tried to go back and look for the last conjunction of Mercury and Venus, and it was way back, many months ago. Okay, so this is something where we may be coming to an agreement, to a compromise. If we combine the significations of Mercury and Venus, we may have graceful communications that we're able to have. Maybe there's a healing conversation that we're willing to do. You can see here if I move forward in the day. You can see Mercury starting to move into its conjunction with Venus at 26 degrees here. There it is. Okay. And also the moon is about to change signs into Taurus, and we'll talk about that in a second. But look at the things that were going on in your life when Venus was back at 26 degrees Cancer, because we're going to be revisiting some of those things. And you may be able to, Venus may be bringing a real harmonizing influence to those mercurial tendencies that we may be having. There's been a lot of tough conversations lately that we've been having, and hopefully Venus is going to help smooth out those edges. And you may be revisiting those things and coming to some sort of compromise around them. Okay, so that is the retrograding Mercury conjoining Venus. The other thing that happens at 5:42 p.m. on Wednesday is the moon moves into the sign of Taurus. Now, this is an interesting thing. It's moving out of that grand trine, that grand fire trine, okay? And it is moving into the sign of Taurus, into a conjunction with Uranus. So anytime we have a planet that's making contact with the Taurus area of the chart now, we're going to have this kind of Uranian quality of, I don't know, Promethean type of, new structures, a shattering, a shock, perhaps. It's something new that wants to be born, being unconventional. The moon, of course, gains dignity when it goes into the sign of Taurus. It is said to be in its exaltation, which was associated with what we've been learning with the moon in the realm of fortune and with honors. So an exalted moon is one that is at the top of the wheel. So if we look at this wheel here and we say that's the realm of fortune, the moon in Taurus is at the top. It's like receiving good fortune. Whereas if it's in the sign of Scorpio, it's kind of at the bottom rung of the wheel, and it's at its lowest point, so to speak. So there may be some kind of good fortune that you may be receiving when the moon goes into Taurus. It may be unexpected with that connection with Uranus. The moon also has triplicity at night now, because the Earth signs have Venus, I believe, as the diurnal ruler, and then the moon as the nocturnal. That's my crazy moon banana. Sorry, I'm drawing on here if you can't see this. So the moon is the nocturnal ruler of the Earth signs. So the moon gets a double whammy of goodness at night now. So if you're doing lunar activities and things like that, you may want to do them at night, because you'll have not only the support of being honored and being at the realm of the winds of fortune, blowing in your direction, being at the height of the wheel, you also will have the winds, okay, blowing at your back. I mixed my metaphors there, but you'll have an ability to be honored for what you're doing, and you will have the support of your community doing that as well. So lunar activities may be very supported at night for the next few days. Okay. The other thing that we're going to see as the moon moves into Taurus is immediately it is going to be coming into a square with the sun. So now you can see that as we move forward at 1 degree, now we have a square, which are of the nature of Mars. So a friction, a conflict, some sort of action that isn't quite matching up, possibly a war, right? Between this lunar, earthy Taurian moon and this very, very solar sun in Leo, this authority. So there may be this kind of conflict between your emotional state and the way that you come across you either using your authority or authority figures in general. There's a conflict between the king and the queen here. Now, this also is initiating a new moon phase. This is the beginning of the last quarter moon phase, which is when we have the moon 90 to 45 degrees behind the sun. Okay, this always happens at the square of the last square of the moon and the sun in the cycle. Okay, and the last quarter phase is all about reevaluating. It's a crisis point, okay, because we are at the square. We're turning away from the gifts that we received at the disseminating phase of this cycle, and we're starting to say, all right, what do we want now? We've already gone through this cycle. Now we need to shift gears. We may be having an existential crisis. The difference between the first quarter crisis and the last quarter crisis is the first quarter is generally associated with something that is happening potentially more externally, whereas the last quarter is more of an internal crisis. It's more of like a crisis of consciousness or of faith. We may not believe the same things that we were believing before, and we are learning to let go. We're not trying to bring something into fruition. We're trying to let go of something. So this is the beginning of the letting go part of the phase of the moon phase, and this happens every moon cycle. We go through last quarter phases all the time. Some of us, like me, were born with the last quarter moon phase, so I'm very familiar with this. If you've noticed in my videos, I'd say that every day is a new existential crisis for me, and I'm going to blame my moon phase. There's some good things about it. I think the positive qualities of a last quarter moon phase, if you were born with that, or if you're experiencing it in your chart, is you really do think long and hard about what you want and the meaning of your actions before you take them. You are able to potentially live a little bit outside of the norm. I would say I've built a life like doing things a little bit differently than your normal person in society. I've read that part of the job of the last quarter moon person in their chart is to reflect the reality of the society back to them and help to dissolve some of the old crystallized structures that need to be released. And maybe that's what I'm doing with some of my astrology here, is holding up the mirror to you or to a society in general and saying, it's time for you to reevaluate what you're doing with your life and how you're using these planetary energies and how you're navigating your life. These videos are very reflective in nature. They're not necessarily just like, boom, bang, boom, let's do this, let's do. It's more like, no, how about we think about the ramifications of our actions and be able to release what no longer is serving us. And that is, I think, more of the vibe of what we're doing here. So in the plant metaphor, at the disseminating phase, we had the fruit, right? We had the flowering phase at full moon. We had at the disseminating phase, we've consolidated that flower into a fruit. to be consumed and distributed. And now at the last quarter, the fruit has fallen off the vine. We've consumed what we need to consume. The seeds are left. Okay, we have just the waste that is left and the seed of the new birth cycle that has fallen to the ground. The vine begins to wither, and we are, going into this darker phase where the seed is going to be going underground and gestating for the new cycle that will be reborn at the next new moon. Okay, so from Wednesday on, this is a time for letting go. The moon is receding in light. You may be really fired up about what you want to do next, but it may not be the time to initiate all that stuff. That time is coming. Jupiter is going to be going direct in the middle of August. Mercury goes direct at the end of the month. You're going to have plenty of opportunities to go at warp speed again in a few weeks. But this time maybe for really evaluating what it is that you really want and getting very clear about that before you become too rash with your external actions. Okay, and that energy perfects at 9:18 p.m. All right, moving on into Thursday. Clear this up. Okay, Thursday, of course, we're still within the last quarter. And the first aspect we have is the conjunction of the moon and Uranus at 6 degrees. Okay, so there we go. The moon is going to be, we're going to start off with a very electric moon. So you may get a jolt of energy, a lightning bolt of awareness. You may have some sort of unexpected event that is triggered in your life in the very early mornings that requires you to take some sort of action or inspires a new perspective. I kind of like it when the moon is in Taurus now because it has dignity, and what it tells me is that these lunar initiations, we may be enacting things that will help us lay the new foundation moving forward. If we think about the sign of Taurus as that earthy foundation, the things that support us, how we create sustenance. Taurus rules the mouth and how we bring things in. Uranus is giving us a huge course correction with all of those types of things. And when the moon hits it, it has that dignity, and it maybe we are starting to bring things into the world that are good for us. And that are maybe unexpected, but this may be a real clue to the new structures that are going to be supporting you in the next Uranian cycle. Okay, so that's the beginning of our morning. As we move through the morning, a few hours, we're going to see the moon start to come into a we're seeing Mars starting to come into a trine with Jupiter. Okay, so that's about 8:30 or so. So now you can see there is a very enthusiastic, action-orientated trine between Mars and Jupiter. Now, the caution I give with that aspect is we still have a square between the Sun and Mars and the Moon and Uranus by whole sign. So there's still some tension between all of those planets. So I would say that Jupiter generally tends to make things bigger. So this may tend to make your actions bigger. It may expand your sense of authority and pride and your commanding nature, your desire to enact authority within your life. So just be wary of that. Be careful that may cause some tension in the Taurus ruled area of your chart if you're too rash with all of that. And that's going to happen about 8:22 a.m. You may be a little bit impulsive, but generally that is a nice aspect between Mars and Jupiter. As we move forward in the day, at about 11 o'clock or so, we're going to see a square between the moon and Mars. Okay? So you may have taken an action impulsively with Mars trining Jupiter. And now there's maybe a moment of reckoning here where we've got a square between the moon in Taurus and Mars in Leo. Remember, squares are of the nature of Mars. So that may be a conversation that you have to have. It may be, you know what I think my thoughts on this were, maybe your emotional nature represented by the moon has to catch up with some of the new impulses that you have towards and the actions that you're taking. Taurus is generally very slow moving. It's patient. It doesn't like changes happening all at once. And there may be a need for taking action, a very fiery type of need, that your body, your reflective, emotional, sensitive nature, your home environment, which is also represented by the moon, is having to play catch up. And it's like, wait a second, the Taurus part of your chart is saying, oh my God, wait a second, you're moving too fast, you're moving too fast, I don't like all these changes. There's a little bit of a conflict that's happening with that, okay? So I think that this is a kind of a thing where you're gonna have to get very in touch with the deep, very internal gut level feeling of the new actions that you may be initiating. And remember, we're still in this last quarter phase. So this is, yes, we're going to be spurred to some actions with Mars making contact with Jupiter and being co-present with the sun. But the general overall energy of this week is a letting go and a reevaluation. So this may be another aspect that tends to slow things down, okay, and asking you to reevaluate what you really want in regards to your security structures in your life, okay? So that's the end of Thursday. As we move into Friday, we're still seeing the last quarter moon. Because remember, this is in the eightfold moon phase. This is 90 degrees to 45 degrees behind the sun. So it lasts for a few days. The first aspect that we're going to see very early on Friday, and we'll back up for a second, is the moon making a trine with Saturn, which is beneficial. There you go. The nature of Jupiter. With a retrograde Saturn, too. Okay? And then it's going to be sextiling Neptune at 5 a.m. or so, at 18 degrees. And then it's going to be making a trine with a retrograde Pluto at about 11 o'clock a.m. at 21 degrees. And then a sextile with Mercury retrograde in the evening, in the early evening, about 5:45 or so at 25 degrees, Taurus and Cancer. So if I were to look at the overall vibe of Friday, we're still going through that last quarter phase. We have harmonious or easy aspects with the trine and the sextile with many outer planets, okay, Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. Now I'm going to consider Saturn, it's the most outermost of the visible planets. So technically, we don't lump it in with Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus as outer planets, quote unquote. But it's a planet that, traditionally was about hovering over your life and seeing the big picture. So I think with these easy aspects with outer planets, two of them that are retrograde, we're going to be taking stock from a very overarching perspective. There's earth and water is very emphasized elementally for this day. So there may be an emotional component, a flowing component that is merging with a very earthy structural component. And that may be very life-giving. When we water the crops, when we water the fields, that's how we help things grow. So one of the things that you might consider on Friday is hovering over your life, taking stock of the past and the things that you've been doing on a larger scheme. And that's going to help inform what the new cycle is going to be at the new moon coming up when we have the new moon in Leo. Reflect. Reflect with, the Saturn ruled area of your chart. What's going on in that Capricorn ruled area of your chart? What's the progress report? Have you been doing the Saturn work that you need to do to really, work within the limitations that you've been given? What's going on in the Neptune ruled area of your chart? What are you be able to separate the illusion from the fantasy? Are you able to dissolve the things in your life that need to be dissolved and that need to go? Are you able to have faith in the process, even if you don't have complete control over it? Neptune is associated, I think, with faith as well, and having altered states of consciousness. How are you in the accepting part of your life? How are you able to accept some of the things that may be out of your control? And then in the Pluto ruled area of your chart, which is also the Saturn ruled area, are you doing the depth work necessary to create a rebirth? Are you doing the depth work necessary to become the phoenix? Are you setting yourself up for whatever wants to be born out of the ashes that are happening in the Capricorn ruled area of your chart? Because when we have, all this stuff going on in Capricorn, eventually there's a rebirth. I mean, all of the hierarchical structures of our lives are going through this kind of metamorphosis, going through this cocooning and this dissolving phase and this rebirth phase. Lots of things are being thrown away. We're learning what needs to stay and what needs to go. Friday is an awesome day for getting in touch with that and revisiting some of these things. It's also going to be touching on that retrograde Mercury at 25 degrees at the end of the day. So there may be some sort of things some documents that need to be revisited. You may have to just make sure that you reread everything and things like that. And there may be something that comes up that maybe you catch an error or something that ends up being beneficial, since it is a moon sextiling Mercury, which is the nature of Venus. So it may be something positive that you catch in that retrograde cycle. So that's our Friday. As we move into the weekend, let's take a look at this here. The first aspect that we're going to be seeing moving into Saturday is the moon sextiling with Venus. And that happens at about 28 degrees or so. Right, there we go. There's a moon. I'm just clicking forward here. Yeah, there's a sextile happening with Venus. And they're sect mates, the moon and Venus. So they're playing on the same political team, and they're having a nice harmonious conversation that's of the nature of Venus with the sextile. Right? And this seems to be a fairly, to me, this looks like somewhat of a relaxing social day. There's not a lot of aspects happening. We do have the moon starting to move after this sextile. The moon is going to move into the sign of Gemini. So the only thing about that is that, my only concern with that is that the moon is going to be losing dignity. It's losing its exaltation in Taurus and losing its triplicity rulership at night. And it's moving into the domicile of Mercury. And it's going to be in what's called aversion to its host. Okay, so what does that mean? That basically means that there is generally there's an aspectual relationship between a planet and whatever planet is ruling the sign that it's in or hosting the sign that it's in. So as the moon moves into Gemini, it is being hosted by Mercury. Now, what's the problem with Mercury, you might ask? Two things. Mercury right now is retrograde, so it's not at its best. It's not the easiest for it to bring its significations into the world of form. Also, the moon is one sign away from Cancer, so it is not able to see, aspect means to see, its host. So it's kind of like Mercury isn't aware that the moon is staying in its temple and not able to provide instructions to be able to gain the resources that it needs. So this may result in some miscommunications. There may be some difficulty, having the right type of conversation that you might want to have. Now, the good thing about this, the best thing I can tell you, is that the moon will be coming into a sextile with the sun at about 10:16 or so a.m. So you can see that about 4 degrees of Gemini and Leo, there is a sextile. So this isn't really a super bad thing here. This is just, some kind of nice passing aspect where there may be a little bit of an easier time, regardless of the ability of Mercury to provide for the host. So that's the beginning of our Saturday. The other important thing that's happening on Saturday is Venus is going to be changing signs. And that is called, the vocabulary word of the day, that is called an ingress. Ingress. I-N-G-R-E-S-S. So we have Venus's ingress into the sign of Leo. Okay? That happens in the evening. So here we see Venus moving through her last degrees of Cancer, which may be difficult. There may be some challenges with that too, with relationships. Anytime a planet is in the very last degrees of a sign, or the anaretic degree, we call it here. And the theory with this is each sign has what's called different bounds or bound rulers. And that's a 5-fold division of a sign where there are different planetary hosts for each bound. And the theory that we're kicking around in our Nightlight Astrology class with Adam Ellenbos is that the bounds are of the nature of Saturn. So these are kind of the rule makers that talk about the limitations that this planet may be living under. And most of these signs here, the end of the bounds, are ruled by malefics, either Mars or Saturn. So we're seeing Venus here. If we look at our sheets, okay, we have Venus moving through the bounds or the terms of Saturn at the very end of its degrees. Okay, so if you see what I've got here, that Venus is going through the bounds of Saturn. So that's why the end of the signs can be difficult. They can feel like we're running up against a brick wall or something like that, because we're within the Hellenistic or the traditional bounds of Saturn. So once Venus escapes the end of a sign like that, or the end of Cancer, we're going to be moving into a whole different kind of condition, which is much nicer. And let's take a look at that. Okay. So the first 6 degrees of Leo are the bounds of the sun. I'm sorry, no, the bounds of Jupiter. I was confusing my notes here. The bounds of Jupiter, even better, because I don't believe that the bounds are ruled by either of the lights. So I just want to make that clear. The sun and the moon are not bound rulers. I got corrected by this at UAC. By a very knowledgeable astrologer too, so that sticks in my brain here. I just misspoke. So being in the bounds of Jupiter, it's much more supportive. It's like the ruler or the person who's making the rules is a little bit more lenient and wants the best for that planet. And instead of the no or the constructive no, we're getting a yes. So as Venus moves into, let's get some thunder in the background here, some rumbly thunder. Okay, you can see that around 9:54 p.m. Venus, okay, moves into Leo. So now Venus is sitting at the table with its host, the sun. It has access to its resources. It's within the bounds of Jupiter. Okay, from 0 to 6 degrees is the bounds of Jupiter, which the sun is also in. And happy day. That is actually, I think, a very nice shift. When we're going to have both Venus and the sun in the bounds of Jupiter, Jupiter is in its own domicile. Wow, I think the mood's going to really lighten. If we had any difficulties on earlier in the day and on Saturday, it's probably going to be party time excellent at the end of the day, to quote Bill and Ted. The only problem with that is it loses triplicity dignity, so it may not have the wind in its sails, but I'm going to say that it probably is gaining some good fortune from being in the temple at the table with its host, the sun. It's probably a more externalized Venus. This Venus is very expressive. You know, it's going to be in the decan of this Five of Wands here in the spotlight. So it may be harmonizing your ability to express yourself. It may increase desire to be seen, Venus being desire. It may bring a little bit more of a expressive quality to any rituals that you may be doing. Remember, Venus was also associated with ritual and religious observance. So there may be more of a visibility associated with the rituals that you're performing, or how you pay tribute to whatever deity or whatnot. And then it may also soften the way that you exert your authority. If we think about the planet acting through the birth channel, and whatever planet is the ruler or the host of that sign or that birth channel, offering its significations to the planet within it. So here's how we follow this. Right now, Leo is ruled by the sun, and it is offering solar significations of authority, commanding, shining your light, the light of the intellect, up to Venus, for Venus to act upon it. So Venus likes to harmonize, Venus likes to soften, Venus likes to beautify. So what we're going to see, hopefully, is Venus start to soften up the way that we're exerting our authority, the way that we're commanding, issuing commands and things like that. Because right now we've had Mars co-present with the sun, which is very like, I want what I want, you're going to do what I want right now, damn it, okay? And with that Venus quality coming in, that's probably a nice balance, counterbalance to that martial energy that has been co-present with the sun. So if you've been having trouble with some of the authority figures in your chart, and they've been maybe oppressive or anything like that, or just really like laying down the hammer, Venus is coming to help out pretty soon here on Saturday, the 27th. All right. Makes sense? We're starting to see some kind of interesting, I don't know, fluency, I think, with the language. Hopefully, if you're a regular follower of this, that you're starting to be able to speak the language and see how these things are working in your life. Make sure that you're testing them out, okay? As we move towards Sunday, the 28th, we've still got that moon in Gemini. We are moving from the last quarter phase into a balsamic phase. So in the beginning of the day, first of all, before we move into the balsamic phase, we have an opposition happening from the moon in Gemini to Jupiter in Sagittarius. That happens around 5 a.m. In Eastern, on the East Coast, Eastern Standard Time. I don't know if, I keep saying Eastern Standard Time, but I'm not sure. Are we in Eastern Daylight Time? I don't know how that works. Eastern Time. I'm pretty sure it's GMT -5 or -4, depending on whichever it is. You get the idea. And I think that one of the things that we're going to be asked, the questions we might be asking ourselves if we're up that early, or leading up to this in the evening before that, are questions of scale. I think whenever we have something Mercury ruled and Jupiter ruled, we are looking at the small things, the tiny things. Mercury likes to divide things up, separate things. Jupiter likes to bring them together. Mercury likes things tiny. Jupiter likes things big. So there is this kind of question that we may be saying, well, how do we, what is big enough? How do we take care of the details? How do the multiplicity of ideas fit within the grander vision? And that's something that you might want to ask yourself. The harmonizing aspect of Jupiter versus the contesting aspect of Mercury, if we think about our cosmic courtroom metaphor here, we've got Jupiter, the judge, and Mercury is the lawyer who is contesting and giving the arguments for one side or the other, where the judge is trying to make a decision based on all of those different contrasting arguments. So you may have to have a conversation, or you may have to have an internal thought process where you're trying to balance out all the different disparate ideas that are coming up and see how they are working within the unified vision that you're trying to do with Jupiter. Now, oppositions are of the nature of Saturn, so you may have to let go of some of the ideas. You may have a lot of ideas with the Gemini moon, but you may have to weed through them and say, you know what, this isn't working. We need to get rid of this so that because it doesn't fit within the bigger picture. Okay. The last decan of Gemini. Now this is happening within the second decan of Gemini, which is associated with the Nine of Swords, which, if you remember, that is the card of someone laying awake at night, like having a nightmare with their head in their hands. The second decan of Sagittarius associated with someone carrying a large bundle of sticks and carrying a large burden. So this very early morning hours, you may be just having some anxiety about all the different things you have to keep straight. Okay? And as the moon moves forward out of that decan and into the third decan, something's got to go. This is the Ten of Swords, where the figure was lying dead on the ground, and we had to make a choice. We had to eliminate one of the twins so that the other would live. Remember that story? One twin died, and the other gave up part of its immortality so that the other twin could live. So we have to figure out what stays and what goes through Sunday here, in the beginning of Sunday. All right, as we get past that opposition, we are going to see the moon move into its balsamic phase. Okay, so the balsamic phase. Let me clear up the drawings here. The balsamic phase begins at about 6 a.m. Okay, and that is where we see the moon being about 45 degrees behind the sun. Okay. There we go, 45 to 0 degrees behind the sun. And just to parse that out, we've got 15 degrees of Gemini are left, 30 degrees. 30 degrees. Actually, it happens before that, as I'm thinking about it, right? Because we have 15 plus 30 is 45. So this may actually happen a little bit after this. Let me think about that. Nope. Let's look for a second. See, this is why Mercury's trying to get me again. Thanks, Mercury. Yeah. This would happen out here, wouldn't it? 10, 30, 40, 40. There it is. Yeah. So I just had the time a little bit wrong on that. It's not at 6 a.m. It's going to be about 2:30 in the afternoon or so as the balsamic phase is going to start. And let's just look at that again. So we've got 10 degrees left of Gemini. We've got 30 degrees here of Cancer, and then 5 degrees of Leo, and that gives us our 45 degrees. So 10 here, 30, and then 5 equals our 45 degree arc of distance, which is associated with the balsamic moon. The balsamic. And the balsamic moon is a time to distill everything that you've learned, to consolidate, to be able to let go of things and consolidate everything into the seed to be planted for the next cycle. This is when the seed is underground, it's gestating, the moon becomes dark, there's darkness. The moon is at its weakest point. It's incubating in the dark soil to be ready to be born. This is the legacy that is being passed on. You've learned all sorts of things. You've evaluated what you learned during the last quarter, and now you're thinking about, okay, this is the knowledge that I'm going to use moving forward in the new moon cycle. You may feel a little bit out of sync. Dimitri George described this as feeling out of sync with the masses or with the populace because we're preparing for that rebirth. You may feel some distance. So it's not really a time to initiate new things. This is a time for getting rid of stuff, really getting in touch with that internal part of yourself. It's not an initiating phase. As we move through the day, the moon's going to be making a sextile with Mars. Okay, that's our, we saw this already here. Sorry. Okay, there we go. There it is. 16 degrees, sextile with Mars. And then it's going to be making a square with Neptune at 11:25 a.m. at 18 degrees. So this may be something where you are discussing the dream. You have learned things from this eclipse cycle. All right, we're really kind of coming to terms with what happened during the eclipse. That was really the beginning of this moon phase, was on July 2nd, the new moon solar eclipse. We've gone through all these oppositions with Cancer and Capricorn, where we've seen all these planets move into Leo, where we've started to figure out what our identity is and what we want moving forward, and our desire and our ability to shine our light. And as the moon makes its square with Neptune, we just have to get in touch with whether we're being too idealistic. We may need to have a conversation discussing the dream. What do we want to manifest next? How do we want the vision to look? Are we being realistic? Are we including others in the process? How does this fit in with the greater vision of either our family, of our community, of our job, the people that we work with our society, and what do we want our legacy to be from this eclipse cycle? Because we're really going to be dealing with this eclipse cycle for the next 6 months, and also there's a greater eclipse cycle of 18 to 19 years, so they're kind of a big deal. And how do we want to navigate all that? What is it that you want to manifest moving forward? Or, without just thinking about it as manifestation, how do you want to navigate those planetary conversations that may be acting upon you? How are you becoming receptive and dealing with those events that are being born and are coming into being? And how are you going to react to those things more gracefully? Because it's not always, I don't completely resonate with the new moon kind of thought process of, oh, it's time for you to do all these new things. Yes, there is part of that, but sometimes events are just being initiated without any help from you. And it may be, like my teacher Adam says, it may be the time that the karma is becoming ripe. So the question may not be, how do you get new things, or how do you manifest? It may be, how do you deal with what is being born in your life through either no fault of your own. I think it is somewhat narcissistic to think that we are, always in control of everything all the time. I don't think that's the case. I can see an argument for co-creating with the divine, but I want to emphasize the co-creation and being able to be receptive and reactive as well as initiating things. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, soapbox over. As we look ahead to next week, just a few things to keep in mind. On the 31st, we have a new moon in Leo, and also Mercury stations direct. The day after that, Mercury is going to be escaping the beams, and we're going to see Mercury having a heliacal morning rise, which is a very important kind of reveal, okay? So if you're going through all the Mercury ruled stuff now, and you're getting frustrated with that, and if there's some retrograded things that you're dealing with, just be patient for a little bit longer, and you're probably going to see some progress in the revelation of the fruits of that labor come to bear around the beginning of August, because Mercury is going to be escaping the beams of the sun. It's going to be gaining a lot of visibility, which is always good, according to the tradition. And we're going to be, it's going to be rising from the sickbed, so to speak, and, becoming much more empowered, much more empowered Mercury after this week. So that is something that I will leave you with looking ahead. So thank you very much for your attention, for listening. I hope that you have a great Leonine inspired week ahead, and that all of your dreams are starting to come true, or at least you are able to navigate your life with a little bit more grace and a little bit more dignity. So I will talk to you soon, everybody. Take care.